All right, welcome in. It's the Breer Report for December the 18th. We are 1 week away from Christmas Day. We are 1 day away from the kickoff of Week 16 in the NFL with the Chargers and Broncos playing tomorrow night on Thursday Night Football. And we have a mailbag edition of the Breer Report for you here on this Wednesday. We're going to start with our first question. This is from Shedrick Carter. That's at Shedrick Carter 2. His question, very simple. What happened to Kirk Cousins? And I think this is complex. I think there are layers to it. I think first and foremost, this is an older player coming back off an Achilles injury. And the reality of it is early in the year, there were signs that he didn't have the same pop in his arm. And part of that is being able to push off when the Achilles injury is in your plant foot. That's generally what happens. And that's the Achilles injury he suffered. We've seen some of that from Aaron Rodgers as well this year. And so, I think that there is some element of that. Early in the year, he didn't have the same pop. I think it came back to him a little bit. He struggled a little bit more of late. I'm not sure he's quite the same player yet, which is to be expected of a guy who's on the back half of his 30s and having suffered this injury, which is tougher for older players than it is for younger players to come back from. I think sometimes we look at some of these things and think it's automatic now because of the advances that have been made in modern medicine that they will come back the same. It's not always the case. So I'm not sure that he was exactly the same. Doesn't mean he can't be the same down the line. It's just a lot of times that first year back, there are some of those things where you can see the effect of the injury. And remember, this isn't like a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes who's coming in with overwhelming arm strength to begin with. So if you lose a little off your fastball, if you're Kirk Cousins, it can cost you. Really like what this is about going forward, I think, is more than just the future. It's about the right now. And I know the way Raheem Morris felt coming out of that game on Monday night, a win, but a little bit of a lackluster win for the offense. And, with the turnovers the last few weeks we've seen from Kirk Cousins, they felt like they needed to get better play out of the position. And steadily, Michael Penix has shown things running the scout team. And they haven't really elevated him or given him the opportunity to run with the first team much. Like when they were in camp, it was very clear cut. Kirk Cousins with the ones, Michael Penix with the twos. As the season started, very clear cut. Kirk Cousins with the ones, Michael Penix getting backup reps and then running the scout team. And so Michael Penix has had a narrow path to proving himself, but he's taken advantage of every opportunity that he's had. He is a guy who should be ready, based on his experience in college. And we've talked about this with Bo Nix and with Jaden Daniels, and he's in the same category as those two. He played 6 years in college, actually one more than the other two. He doesn't have quite the volume of starts those guys do because of the injuries that he suffered in college. But like those other two, he was a multi-year starter at multiple schools in 2 different Power 5 conferences. Just from a readiness standpoint, he should be top of the heap, right there with Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix as far as being pro ready. And so, I think you look at a kid who's prepared for this and who should be ready for it. And now you see, we'll see if they can get better production from the position. What's really interesting is going forward, what this means for the franchise. You'd assume this means the likelihood now is that Penix will be the starter in 2025, or at least the door is wide open for that to happen. The Falcons sunk $62.5 million in cash into Kirk Cousins this year. It sucks. It's a lot of money to pay for 1 year of a guy, especially if he's not going to be your starter the year after. I do wonder if now they have to view it as a sunk cost, the way the Broncos approached offloading Russell Wilson last year. And, his contract, because it's set up that way, does make him a little bit more tradable. But his mobility isn't what it was. Again, he doesn't have the same pop that he had before. Can you trade a guy who's got $27.5 million fully guaranteed for next year? It might be tough. And so if you can't trade him, then you have to, maybe you cut him, but if you cut him, then you're going to be responsible for all of that money for a guy who's not on your roster. And now somebody can just come in and sign him at the minimum and let you take care of the rest with the offsets. You're still looking at a bill of almost $90 million for just 1 year from the guy. So obviously the signing does not look good right now. And, it's going to be about how the Falcons approach it. And I think, in large part too, about how Michael Penix looks over the next 3 weeks. Our second question for this week comes from Derek Heldenbrand. That's at Stuff Derek Says. How likely is it Chris Ballard and or Shane Steichen get fired this offseason? Irsay has preached continuity of general manager, head coach, and quarterback, which will be crucial for Anthony Richardson's development, but hard to look past the team's lackluster results under Ballard. I think that's fair. Derek, I have not heard much about them moving on from Shane Steichen. I have heard more on the possibility they could move on from Chris Ballard. And, like these half measures don't oftentimes work. And the Colts have traditionally over the years, whether it's Chris Ballard as GM, Ryan Grigson as GM, Bill Polian as GM, they've had a general manager who's sort of been the head of football operations and the guy everybody answers to. If they come out of this and they do wind up firing the general manager and not the head coach, do they change that model? That's an open question. Who are the GM candidates that you could connect to Shane Steichen? Fair question. But I think Chris Ballard himself would tell you, like, he's had 8 seasons now to get this right. And, they still are in a position where I believe it's 2 playoff berths over those 8 seasons. It does not look great. If you look at the composite of it. So I think the question for Jim Irsay and his group becomes whether or not you want to go through a half measure, or you want to give these 2 guys another offseason together to work on it and to try to get it right. Because even if they were to sneak in the playoffs, and that looks unlikely now, but even if they were to sneak into the playoffs, it's hard to see where they would be in position to make a ton of noise. And, the quarterback question is obviously a big one too, with so much uncertainty. Finally, question number 3 from James Riley at Dragon Design. Texans offense struggled to do the offensive line or offensive concept more. I think it's both. They certainly haven't gotten their money's worth in the offensive line. Like Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard is still a really good tackle combination. They haven't played to their contracts this year. And then you have the injury issues and the inconsistency issues of the interior 3. And you haven't gotten what you'd hope. Now Green's hurt, but he's a former first-round pick who you haven't gotten the return on. Shaq Mason's feeling his age a little bit. Juice Scruggs, like that again, like that's a guy that they were really counting on to develop. So the offensive line is absolutely an issue. And then the concepts, the scheme, I think that has raised some questions internally too. Not saying that they're going to make big changes on the offensive side of the ball, but I think it's something they're definitely going to look at this offseason, and whether or not the offense that they ran and Bobby Slowick ran in 2024, if some of those things have gotten stale, and what they can do to fix it to get CJ Stroud back up and running again. Not that CJ has played like his play's fallen off a cliff, but I think anybody who's watched can say, like, he does not look like the same guy he did last year. And yeah, you can pin it on certain things like the injury to Stephon Diggs, again, the regression on the offensive line. But last year they played big chunks of the year, without Tank Dell, and now you look at it like they did play a chunk this year without Nico Collins, but you should see a little bit more, I think, in year 2 from your quarterback and the offense based on how they played last year. Appreciate you guys coming out. We'll have another Breer report for you on Friday after the Chargers-Broncos game. As always, check out the mailbag in full on the mmqb.com. It'll be up there later today. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, everybody. We'll see you guys on Friday.